Welcome back to the Walter Bosley channel, where our friend Todd Wood joins us once again for another great Killifornia episode. This one is the Aztec Connection Part 1. You guys know what that means. There's going to be more to this discussion, and you're going to love it. So welcome back, Todd, to another episode of Killifornia, or yeah.
Mm.
You should be welcoming us.
I'm just happy to be here in the Bosley verse.
So, tell us about the Aztec connection.
Well, I think I should start off by saying that in this research community, we have a habit of sort of using Satanism as a blank statement,
Mm-hmm.
sort of a catch-all for occult crime. But anyone who looks deeper and goes deeper with their analysis, a lot of times what you will find out it's really not Satanism at all. In fact, it's paganism or even neo-paganism. Um, you have to consider the time, late 1960s into the 70s. The New Age movement was big. I mean, big. It was the cool thing, right?
Yeah.
So upon my analysis of the 4P cult, what I've discovered is, in fact, what we're dealing with here is not Satanism. It's more or less paganism. The methodology of human sacrifice with heart extraction, heart consumption is Aztec, right? And the interesting thing about the Aztecs is they would have their years were laid out in 16-month years,
Okay.
right? Now, 10 of those months, or I should say, each month had a different festival. At each festival, there's a sacrifice was required. Human sacrifice was required, an homage to the gods.
Mm-hmm.
Also, a way of gaining power.
Mm-hmm.
Now, 10 out of those 16 months, heart extraction is the preferred methodology of human sacrifice. The victims change. Sometimes it's captives, sometimes it's women, or
Mm-hmm.
it's royal women, women of nobility. But those other months, the methodology of sacrifice changes to something like starving someone to death in a cave, or gladiators fighting to the death, or burning someone alive, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when I started doing this research into the 4P cult, of course, we have to give Ed Sanders credit. We wouldn't know about the 4P cult if it wasn't for his research into Charles Manson and his book, The Family.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what we discover is that the methodology of human sacrifice, like I said before, is heart extraction and heart consumption, much like the Aztecs. And this sort of set me on a path to see what else is out there. And I came across a particular case in 1963 of a cult operating in Tama sorry, Tama Lipiaz,
Okay.
which is a Mexican state. It's the same state where
Wait,
the city.
wait. I think you mean Tamalpay.
No. Tamaulipas. Tamaulipas.
Oh, I always pronounce that Tamalpay. I might be, maybe I'm getting. Malia would know. We'll ask her.
Yeah. It's the same state where Matamoros, the city of
Okay.
Matamoros, is located.
Right.
So that makes the whole thing a way more interesting. In 1963, there was
Mm-hmm.
a cult operating in this particular Mexican state, run by a woman named Magdalena Solis, who
Yes.
thought her, who thought of herself as the reincarnation of Coatlicue, who is a earth goddess, a goddess of fertility, a goddess of life and death and rebirth. sort of like the seasons, if you need to think of it like that.
Okay.
Um, well, they did the same thing as the 4P cult. They would do blood drinking rituals. Now, the interesting thing about their blood drinking rituals is they would it would be a human blood mixed with chicken blood, and they would mix THC as well as peyote in the blood, and thus the members thought that they were getting supernatural abilities. It's very fascinating because it's also very similar to what Adolfo Costanzo was doing in his cult, but that's a different story because that's Palo Mayambe
Mm-hmm.
and not Aztec. So, uh, so I started looking for parallels, right? And
Mm-hmm.
of course, we everybody knows the case of Stanley Baker, 1970, July 13th. There was a hit and run in Big Sur, California. 3 people were injured, and Stanley Baker and his companion Harry, uh, sorry, um, Harry Allen's Strumped. I think that's how you say his name. You have to excuse me for a second.
No problem.
Harry Allen's his companion and himself, Harry Allen Strump,
Mm-hmm.
uh, who were responsible for the hit and run. Police were looking for him, and when the police were finally caught up with him. Of course, we all know the story about Stanley Baker pulling the finger out of his pocket and saying, "I have a problem. I am a cannibal." Well, interestingly enough, um, the person he murdered was a gentleman by the name of James Glauser, a social worker in Montana. But it's the same methodology of sacrifice: heart extraction, heart consumption. Right. Not only that, it falls the murder on July 11th, 2 days before he was captured in California, falls perfectly on the last day of the 8th month of the Aztec calendar. Of course, that month, the required human sacrifice methodology was heart extraction. Of course, I continued in this research, and I discovered the month before, on June 2nd, of course, which June 2nd being the first day of the 7th month of the Aztec calendar, there is 2 murders committed. One of a service station attendant by the name of John Wayne Carlin by a 16-year-old Arthur Moose Holst, who was
Mm-hmm.
part of sort of what I call sort of a cell, a little gang. And then on the 3rd day of June, the murder of Florence Nancy Brown happened. And again, we're dealing with the same methodology of human sacrifice. She was murdered in the orange groves of Irvine, California, and her heart was removed. Now, the fascinating thing about this one is he actually stole the woman's car and drove the heart to Santa Cruz. Later on, he was used in a ritual, and later on, he was caught in a farmhouse. The fascinating thing about that is Santa Cruz is reportedly where the 4P meeting or the 4Pi movement would have their gatherings before they schismed into 2 groups. One stayed in Santa Cruz, and the other moved to Santa Ana in 1969 in Orange County. So
Wow.
that's two. That's 2 murders, right? So we're not quite
Did
at
he
it.
did what did he do with the heart in Santa Cruz?
He used it in a ritual. I think he ended up eating it.
So it was
Uh,
left there, or did he go on somewhere from there?
yeah. No, he started hiding out, much like John Lindley Frazier. He hid out in like a
Okay,
farmhouse.
but he consumed it in Santa Cruz.
Right. All
So
right.
he did not leave her heart in San Francisco.
No, no, no. He didn't leave it in Santa Ana or in Orange County either. Um, it was used in a ritual. Of course, I may be mistaken. It also because there was other body parts that were missing, like the left arm and a lung. So, what got eaten and what actually was used in the ritual itself can be kind of iffy.
Yeah.
But following this pattern, recently Dana and I, shout out to Dana Dudall, she
Yes.
sends me this article about a serial killer by the name of Tony Costa, who killed two women in 1968. And lo and behold, the women's hearts were missing when
Oh.
the authorities found the bodies. And lo and behold, he spent time in California, 1966 to 1968. He lived in Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco, not too far away from Santa Cruz. There's reason to suspect that Mr. Costa himself may have also been part of the Four Pi, or at least attended a meeting, you know. The other imagery and symbology of the gatherings of the Four Pi movement also would suggest Aztec or neo-paganism. Um, the person who gives us this information is a police or is a jailhouse informant. And what he describes is an altar strewn with dragons. But in my opinion, it's probably not dragons. It's most likely serpents, or again, the goddess Kuatalku. Of course, if we're talking about paganism, we're talking about rebirth, right? We're talking about nature. The fascinating thing about a pagan cult versus a satanic cult is a pagan cult lends itself to environmental terrorism quite well, quite well. Thus, there might be a connection to the John Lindley Frazier situation and the Oda murders, which connects back to the Charles Manson tape murders through the glasses that Victor Oda prescribed. Of
So
course, go ahead.
No. You go ahead. You go ahead.
Another interesting aspect is another victim that's described by the informant is because the people they usually sacrifices are runaways or homeless people, drifters. Sometimes they couldn't find someone to sacrifice, so there would be a volunteer, right? And supposedly this person went out on November 9th. November 9th, the first day of the 15th month of the Aztec calendar, which, of course, the required sacrifice of that particular month is heart extraction. Now, the interesting thing is, how do you sell that to somebody? How did you sell that to one of your members? Well, you can't use Satanism to do that.
Yeah.
You'd have to use romanticism.
Of course, to make it
your death, right? Your death is bringing in the age of Aquarius. You're doing something righteous. You can't do that with Satanism.
Right.
Right? You have to use romanticism. But considering the blood drinking rituals I mentioned before, there's most likely this young lady, due to her going out with a smile on her face, was plastered with a hell of a lot of drugs. They kill her. They extract the heart being a muscle, locks in the drugs, the tainted blood. The top echelons of the group feast on the heart. They get high. They drink the blood of the victim. Another reason why you would do that is MK Ultra, mind control purposes, right? Okay. Yeah. You apply the blood with drugs such as peyote, LSD, THC, what have you. Is what happens. That plus the theatrics creates the illusion of a supernatural religious experience.
Mm-hmm.
So somebody thinks they're experiencing something special. It sticks with them. Someone who's just a passerby can become devout like that. Look what the Grand Shingon did. He made me have this great experience. He made me see the world the way it really is, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of brilliant. But so anyways, getting back to this particular, the Four Pi cult and the Aztec connection, it seems to me that in this research community, we really need to work harder on our analyses. Mm-hmm. We need to push the envelope, and we need to go deeper. What do you think, Walter?
Yeah. there is a little too much fallback across the community in multiple things. For instance, the UFO discussion, the fallback assumption is that the ET hypothesis is the explanation, or that, of course, we're talking about ETs. And when we talk about cult murder, you know, and sacrificial murder, we automatically think, oh, we're talking about the devil. And that's not necessarily the case at all. It could be these, you know, this ancient tradition. There's the Aztec tradition that we're talking about. There are the old thuggy devotees of Kali, and those two might even be connected. The Aztec and the Kali.
Indeed, they
worship.
are. Indeed, they are. A lot of the aspects of Kali is shared by Huatulco. They're very similar. Life and death and fertility and all of that, even war. Now that as a cult leader, you have to ask yourself, how do you sell Satanism? How do you go up to a college kid and be like, hey, how do you feel about hellfire? You know, you can't sell that. You have to, if you're a cult leader in this situation and you've got a bunch of squares wanting you to go to war in Vietnam, and you got these other hippies who want to usher in a new age of Aquarius or something like that, right, you have to sell it to them like, oh, you guys are Luke Skywalker, you're the rebel forces, we're going to change the world,
that's the hero.
Right, exactly. You can't do that with Satanism because of preconditioning. Because the majority of Californians at that point in time were Catholic. So, do the preconditioning, just like we're preconditioned in school to raise our hand and stand in line and this, that, and the other. You have to, it's like a big brick wall. There's no way to get through it, really, and make it stick, right? And you need something that appeals to a lot of different types of people.
Well, you know, this is why there are different levels or tiers of recruitment, for instance, into some cults. And they will, a lot of times, this is why they recruit in the drug culture, okay? Or very popularly, the open relationship, polygamous sex culture, the swingers, so to speak. Right. Because they're already you know, they have fewer inhibitions already compared to most people. So there they are, you know, with their sexcapades going on, and the angle is, well, hey, if you find this thrilling, try the sexcapades on this drug. So then they get them doing sex under hallucinogenics, which is wild. And these people go, oh, wow, man, this is mind blowing. It's like, well, then from the people they get to try that, they're watching and vetting, and then they pick a select few and say, look, if you really enjoy the sex on hallucinogenics, you should put magical ritual into the mix. And so then those who are willing to try it, they're on the hallucinogenics, and then they start doing their sexcapades during ritual magic. And then if the goal is to get someone to participate in some type of human sacrifice, you know, you say, well, if you like sex, magic, drug-induced rituals, just wait till you try doing a sacrifice.
Right.
And there you go, because you've lured them with pleasure. You've lured them with hedonistic physical pleasures, and you know, human bodies respond positively to those kinds of things, and so their minds, you know, follow easily.
Right. You're right. I mean, sex was a big part of the 4-Pi movement, or the 4P cult, or the Qigong cult, whatever you'd like to call it. I agree with magic too, ritual magic. I also think that you need both kinds of magic with a K and magic with a C. A cult leader should be able to use sleight of hand, and it's most likely that a lot of them do. Now, there's also the speculation out there that the whole Aztec methodology and the pagan cult is really just a cover up for a intel operation. And I find this fascinating considering who was the CIA section chief in Mexico at the time, and that was David Atlee Phillips. So we have to also ask ourselves the question: did they just look at the Magdalena Solis stuff and then decide to use the Aztec thing as a template for their op?
Yeah, good thinking.
Considering that the speculation and the theory that's out there, according to David Sylvia's book Project Artichoke, of course I just butchered that name, that William Joseph Bryan is the Grand Shingon, and we all know that William Joseph Bryan, anybody who's reading the RFK files right now, who he will probably show up, was a big asset of the CIA, and it was helping the LAPD and was part of all this stuff with Project Artichoke and MK Ultra. But to dive even deeper into the Aztec stuff, like of course, I think what we'll do is we'll save like the stellar timetable stuff for the next episode. Just because with that we're going to get into Zodiac Killer, we're going to get into Son of Sam, we're going to get into everything really that was going on back then, because there's just the stuff that Dana and I are finding is just fascinating, absolutely fascinating. But also I should say this: even with the reports of mutilated dogs that came out in 1968 in Santa Cruz and other places in that part of California, of course the person, the expert, the head of animal control in Santa Cruz, said whoever was doing this was so good with a knife, the knife never even touched the bone. And the dogs were flayed. Well, guess what? There's an actual god of flaying in the Aztec pantheon by the name of Jepe Totec. Hopefully I just said that correctly. Now, the interesting thing about the dog stuff is in Aztec culture, dogs are your guide through the underworld. So one reason why these dogs may have been murdered and mutilated is, as one, a sacrifice, and two, to make sure that you had a guide going when you got to the underworld waiting for you to show you your way. Of course, the dog thing, interestingly enough, there may be a link between the Son of Sam cult and the 4P cult, because there's a lot of it's a similar situation with German Shepherds over there in Long Island, New York. You know, I know. What's your take on all this, Walter?
I think that we talked about this last summer a little bit privately. I think that there is a link between the Aztec blood sacrifice and Kali worship. And I think that Kali worship might be at the heart of these things, no pun intended, at the heart of these things that we're talking about with human sacrifice, and particularly, the consumption of hearts and blood. I think there's something threading Kali through all of this. Of course, people say, well, Walter's seeing the Vedic everywhere he looks. Well, I guess you could argue that, but I mean, where I'm looking and I'm seeing, this is reflected in the Vedic and the Hinduism and such. Now,
I see that too.
Thing about it being California, back during the World War I era and leading up to the years before the U.S. gets into World War I, Rick Spence and I write about this to some detail in Empire of the Wheel 1. And that was the Hindu-German conspiracy, as it was called. And what that was excuse me, an alliance between German intelligence and the intelligence agents of India, who, if you recall your history, were in a struggle, the beginning of their struggle for independence from England. What led to their ultimate independence in the late 40s, was going on strong back then. So India and Germany decided that they had the same enemy, and Germany was smuggling guns up through the Gulf of Mexico, across the American Southwest on the railroads, and through San Bernardino here onto San Diego, or up north where they would load the guns, the munitions aboard boats and ships, and send them to India via Burma. Okay, and there was one of these ships. The first one was caught off the coast of, or leaving San Diego. That was the Annie Larson. But anyway, at the time, um, this was all part of what was going on with California, crawling with spies from India, and having a vibrant Hindu community throughout the state. And so, what I find really interesting is, of course, you're going to have Kali worship influence here all throughout California. Okay, because this was, when you look in the history, this was a big deal. There's been a strong, thriving um, uh, Indian, immigrant community from India for, over a century in California. So it shouldn't surprise us if somewhere in the mix there you had some dark Kali worship
Yeah.
that was
Well,
picked up by either these individual serial killers, or whatever groups, cults that were doing this in California.
right.
Um, it's not like you can ask, where the heck would they be influenced by Kali worshippers? Well, right here in California.
Right. Well, that's really interesting that you bring up Kali. So,
Oh, excuse me, and California.
of course. Okay. So, most pagan societies had a 13-month year,
Yeah,
equal 28-day months, with the exception of one day that a lot of times would be referred to as the day out of time.
yeah.
A lot of civilizations celebrate this day as a holiday still to this day.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you have the Dali line, DALI, which is 1, 1, 8, 15, and 22.
Mm-hmm.
So those days. And then you have, I think, Santos, but number 3 is Kali.
So, okay, well, there's an initial taste of where Todd's taking us with the Aztec discussion, the Aztec thread, in this whole California thing here. And I think it's going to be a very fruitful direction, Todd, in the ongoing discussion about California. So I'm looking forward to the next one. So thanks again for coming on and kicking this off, because folks, this we just kicked off this particular thread of the discussion, and I think it's going to go to some pretty revealing places as we continue. So thanks again, Todd.
Thank you. Thank you, Bosley Verse.